Week 3 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few defense DST units. I have his sleeper options this week. The first one of the Chicago Bears. So the Bears right now, they've been added in tons of fantasy leagues at 30%, but right now still available in a decent amount of leagues. It's 66% of leagues. Here's this Bear team. So this Bear team, they're 1 week use only, unless you want to use them next week at the New York Giants. But after that, they got Minnesota, Washington, New England, and Dallas. Pretty decent offenses for weeks to start the season. Week 1 versus San Francisco, pretty good outing, but that had to do with the wet field and bad weather conditions. 10 points allowed, 2 sacks, and then a fumble recovery. In Week 2 at Green Bay, Aaron Rodgers does what he does best versus the Bears, and he had a nice ball game. 27 points allowed. This defense gave up 3 sacks, a fumble recovery. But Week 3 here, good matchup versus Davis Mills and the young Houston Texans team coming into Soldier Field here. So I think this Bear team can make a few plays, and it wouldn't be surprising to me if they have a similar type of ball game like they did in Week 1 in terms of fantasy points, anywhere from 8 to 10 fantasy points. And if you're in a pinch for a defense, like I said, this Bear defense available in 66% of fantasy leagues, and they got the home field advantage as well. The next defense, the New York Giants. So the Giants versus the Dallas Cowboy team with a lot of injuries. Obviously, Dalton Schultz, he's probably not going to play in this game. I know Michael Gallup's probably coming back, but he's not going to be 100%. And Dak Prescott definitely not playing this week as well, even though Cooper Rush at times has looked pretty decent. So right now, this Giant defense DST unit available in 91% of fantasy leagues. In the first couple weeks, they played better real-life defense than fantasy defense. Week 1 at Tennessee, 20 points allowed, a sack, a fumble recovery, good for 4 fantasy points. In Week 2 versus the Panthers, 16 points allowed, 2 sacks, 2 fumble recoveries. So right here, I think in this ball game, their defense will give up anywhere from 17 to 23 points. But I think they'll get 2 or 3 sacks at least and 1 or 2 turnovers. So as a decent option in a pinch towards the end of the week here, going into the weekend and when the game's on Sunday, well, even though this one's a Monday night ball game, I think this Giant defense can make a few plays on Cooper Rush. And them and the Cowboys always have tough football games. I think it could be a defensive battle, or these defenses make plays in this one. And the third and final defense, DST unit I have as a sleeper this week's the Atlanta Falcons. So the Falcons, I know the first couple weeks of the season, their defense has been torched for the most part. But I like the matchup versus the Seattle Seahawks a little bit. Geno Smith, I know he's looked better than this year than he has the last couple seasons. But this offense last week couldn't get anything going besides Tyler Lockett. Metcalf didn't do much. The running backs didn't do anything over there in Seattle. I know they're back home with the 12th man this week here. But I think this Atlanta Falcon defense, last week we saw it. They scored a special teams touchdown on a block kick. And this week here, I don't think they're going to score a touchdown. I think this Atlanta Falcon team can make a few plays on Geno Smith. And the first couple weeks for them, Week 1 versus New Orleans, 27 points allowed, 4 sacks, a fumble recovery. And Week 2 with the Rams, like I mentioned, 30 points allowed, but a sack, 2 interceptions, the block kick for a touchdown, and a safety. So right here, it's pretty tough Ram offense. This Falcon team, a pretty good fantasy day with 16 fantasy points. I don't think they're going to score a touchdown here in Week 3 at Seattle, but I think they could get to Geno a few times. Maybe 1 or 2 turnovers in this one. And it's a sleeper option available in 96% of fantasy leagues. I think they're a decent sleeper defense this week. So that's a few DST defensive units I have as sleeper options for Week 3 of the fantasy football season.